In 1987, America went from being the world's largest creditor to its biggest debtor. The transformation wasn't an accident, it was by design. Today we're diving into a revealing conversation from the TFTC podcast with Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin about how the banking system really works and why the coming debt the next few minutes will change how you think about money, debt, and why certain powerful figures might be pushing for a financial collapse. Let's hear from Mark Goodwin explaining how this shift began.
In the early 80s, we were the largest creditor in the world, and by 87, we were the largest debtor. Where did all that money go? A lot of it went to Latin America, this whole Latin America debt crisis.
Transformation of America from creditor to debtor marked a deliberate shift in global financial power. The 1980s weren't just about Reagan and deregulation. They represented a fundamental restructuring of how money flows around the world. The Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker raised interest rates to historic levels, which strengthened the dollar, but made U.S. debt more attractive to foreign investors. This wasn't just economic policy, it was a strategy to make the world dependent on U.S. debt. The story gets deeper. Whitney Webb explains how debt has been weaponized globally.
Pretty much as soon as Latin American countries became independent, they began to be attacked by banks and started having their first debt crises. Again, manufactured, most of them by the Bank of England or by British banks or the City of London.
The pattern of using debt as a weapon goes far beyond Latin America. We saw it in Asia during the 1997 financial crisis, in Greece after 2008, and we're seeing it today in developing nations struggling with dollar-denominated debt. When a country owes money in dollars, they're effectively surrendering their economic sovereignty. They have to earn dollars through exports or borrow more just to pay interest on their existing debt. What many don't realize is that this system creates a form of modern colonialism. Countries rich in natural resources often find themselves poor after taking loans from international banks. They're forced to extract and export their resources at prices favorable to international markets rather than developing their own industries. It's a sophisticated form of resource extraction masked as economic development. Here's where things get interesting. And this isn't just about history. The same playbook is being used today. Whitney continues.
That has continued for decades and decades. The cycle repeats, and it's happened everywhere. And now, since the Bretton Woods system and post-World War II, you've had the IMF, you've had the World Bank, and these entities, using debt slavery, essentially, to, force countries to do things they otherwise wouldn't do, erode sovereignty.
The IMF and World Bank aren't just lending institutions, they're architects of a global economic order. When they provide loans, they demand policy changes that often harm local economies while benefiting multinational corporations. For example, a common condition is forcing countries to remove protections for local farmers, opening their markets to subsidized agricultural products from wealthy nations. This destroys local farming communities while creating dependent markets for international agribusiness. This system creates what economists call a debt trap. Countries take loans in dollars, which they need to earn through exports, but the policies imposed on them make it harder to develop industries that could generate those dollars, forcing them to borrow more. It's like being forced to take out new credit cards just to pay the interest on your old ones. The role of private banks in this system is crucial. They often work in tandem with these international institutions, making private loans alongside official ones. This creates a web of obligations that makes it nearly impossible for countries to escape the system even when they want to pursue different economic policies. What most people don't realize is how deregulation played into this strategy. Mark explains the truth about Glass-Steagall's repeal.
GlassSteagall worked. It was deregulation. It was. Citibank put $100 million into, lobbying people like, the head of the Senate Banking Committee at the time, Alphonse D'Amato, who was heavily connected to Gillibrand.
Glass-Steagall's repeal wasn't just another piece of 1990s deregulation. It was the culmination of a decades-long effort to remove the safeguards put in place after the Great Depression. The banking industry spent hundreds of millions.
What GlassSteagall actually did was it king-made Citi and Travelers, which became Citigroup, to become, this just unbelievable, blob entity.
Think about what banks have become since then. JP Morgan Chase isn't just a bank anymore. It's a complex financial institution that can take your deposits while also creating exotic financial instruments, trading for its own profit, and even physically storing and trading commodities. This concentration of financial power makes the entire system more fragile while making it harder for smaller local banks to compete. This matters because when banks get this big and complex, they gain enormous political power. They can influence everything from interest rates to foreign policy. The line between banking and government policy becomes increasingly blurred, creating what some call a financial political complex similar to the military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned about. The creation of these financial giants had consequences that went far beyond Wall Street. When banks like Citigroup were allowed to combine commercial and investment banking, they gained unprecedented control over the entire economy. They became what's known as universal banks, institutions that could take your savings deposits while also creating complex derivatives and engaging in high-risk trading. This consolidation created a dangerous scenario where banks became not just too big to fail, but too big to jail. During the 2008 financial crisis, we saw how this played out. Despite widespread fraud and misconduct, no major bank executives faced criminal charges. The system had become so interconnected that prosecuting these institutions was seen as a threat to economic stability itself. The consequences of this system are playing out right now. Like, we're facing a potential debt crisis that could dwarf 2008. Whitney warns about what's coming.
It's essentially been admitted that, the next president, who we know now will be Trump, is going to face some sort of U.S. government debt crisis. And of course, that debt crisis is the consequence of wildly irresponsible fiscal policy.
This warning about an impending debt crisis isn't just speculation. It's based on hard numbers. The U.S. national debt has surpassed $34 trillion, with interest payments alone consuming an ever larger portion of the federal budget. But here's what makes this situation different from past crises. The federal government has never faced this level of debt while interest rates were rising, and other major economies were also struggling with their own debt problems. What's particularly concerning is how this crisis might be used to reshape the financial system. Throughout history, crises have been used to implement dramatic changes that wouldn't be acceptable under normal circumstances. After 2008, we saw the introduction of quantitative easing and near zero interest rates. The next crisis could be used to push even more dramatic changes, possibly including the introduction of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, or other forms of digital money that could increase financial surveillance and control. The reality is that this debt crisis isn't happening by accident. Just as the shift from creditor to debtor nation in the 1980s was engineered, the current situation reflects decades of policy choices that have consistently favored financial institutions over the general public. The federal government has repeatedly chosen to solve problems by taking on more debt, while the Federal Reserve's policies have encouraged speculation and risk-taking. These revelations matter because they affect everyone's financial future. The banking system isn't just broken, it was designed this way. Understanding how it works is the first step to protecting yourself. Whether it's through holding hard assets, understanding the risks in your bank accounts, or simply being prepared for financial turbulence, knowledge of how this system really works is crucial for personal financial survival. If you want to hear the full conversation about the banking system, debt crisis, and what it means for the future, check out the complete episode of the TFTC podcast in the description below. Hit the like button if you learned something new and leave a comment with your thoughts on the debt-based monetary system.